report, fiscal year 11, fiscal year 12. Chief of Game Larry Gilbertson. Chief of Game Larry Gilbertson will present the final predator management plan.
Mr. Chairman, for the record, Larry Gilbertson, Department of Wildlife. The last time this plan was presented, there was just a couple of things that hadn't been completed. Actually, only with the last table and the dollar amounts for the projects for the fiscal 12. And so we proved it again, and my staff specialist who graduated from Utah State pointed out that we called Utah State University of Utah, so we fixed that too. But in the table at the back, essentially we put the amounts for project 6, 18, 20, 21, 22, and 23, and 26 that we allotted for fiscal 12 for wildlife services to spend, and it comes up to $405,635. And the amount for the department didn't change from last year. We kept that the same. And the amounts that you see in there for the projects are actually less than some of Wildlife Services estimates, but we reduced them all proportionally so that we wouldn't go into deficit spending. We were looking at the amounts Wildlife Services put in there, and if we actually used those amounts, we would be using the money that's not going to be here until the application process in March. So based on past estimates, we bring in about $400,000 a year, $401,000. So we just reduce those amounts all proportionately, and it comes up to the amount you see there, $405,635 for Wildlife Services. And that means we should start fiscal 13 with the money that comes in, which should, if we expend all this money, would be $401,000, which is what comes in. But if we don't spend it all, then we'll have a little more than that. So that's essentially what the change we made. It's not technically deficit spending, but we haven't done that before where we're tapping into money that we're waiting to come in March. It's always been based on what was already there at the start of the fiscal. So that's why we made that change.
Chairman McBeath, I'd like to ask Mr. Gilbertson a question.
Sure, go ahead, Hank.
Mr. Gilbertson, with that $400,000, are there the $3 matching funds that come in from the federal government?
No, this fund hasn't been matched very much. The only time it was is when we got approval for the Utah State coyote control project, and $25,000 is allotted from this fund, from the $3 fee, and that one is matched. So the coyote study that we're doing in Central Nevada is a $100,000 project a year, and only $25,000 of it comes from the $3 fee. So that's the portion of it that is matched.
I see. Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead, Commissioner McBeath.
Larry, and I think it's important to point out that the reason for that is because those federal matches don't allow for federal dollars to be matched when you're doing predator control. You can do studies, you can do your research, but when you're starting to put animals on the ground, starting to control, then you exempt yourself from those opportunities. That's a real important thing for everybody to understand. That's part of the
requirements of the federal aid, and that's a really good point. And the reason the coyote study works is because we were already planning on doing some coyote removal in Area 16 and the areas we're doing the coyote study, and the study is to study the impacts of that removal. So it's the study portion of it. We won't be spending any of those dollars to remove the coyotes. Those will come out of a different project. So.
Mr. Chairman, I have.
Oh, go ahead, Commissioner.
So I guess, are we asking questions or making comment on specific projects? Or
yeah, I think the whole plan is up for, I mean, I don't recall having had a lot of discussions about the particulars on the plan, have we, or did we?
No, I don't believe we've had huge discussions, just some small questions on some of the projects is so far.
Okay. So yeah, I'm saying everything's open.
A lot of them were around when I was here before, so there are continuations of some of those. Project 26, I think there was a prediction many years ago that it was just going to be a matter of time before we would start funding personnel for wildlife services, and sure enough, here it is. And I think it's, personally, I think it's a really bad precedent. I think it's an inappropriate way to deal with those funds. I know that, you know, that there's an indirect correlation to bringing those folks on. If we're going to do something, they need to be proposing to us, they need to be giving us a cost, and then they deal with their personnel issues through the contract. If they're able to hire people because of the money that we've given them, because that's part of how they've set up their project, that's fine. But to just fund a position, that's my understanding, this is just funding a position for them, is that right?
Well, initially they were thinking of funding a position, and what this has turned into is when they're doing the other projects that are identified in here, quite often what they're doing is hiring some part-time, several, because there's projects all over the state. So instead of having one person who would be tied up in one place, they're hiring some part-time, and it's usually retired wildlife services guys that they'll hire back and use them part-time while they're out there doing the actual projects to be the ground crew, to assist with the ground crew. So that's how it's been working out.
Okay, and
which is good.
In my mind, that's, you know, for, you know, they present their proposals and they give the, you know, cost, which is based on personnel costs and things of that nature in their project-specific proposals. And now we've taken that additional step of just flat funding a position, and that I think it's a real bad precedent. I think the potential, I mean, what's going to preclude sending $500,000 their way to deal with their staffing problems for a year when their budgets are cut or something. You know, I just look at it as a bad precedent.
Okay, any other comment from the commission? Any other questions for the chief? Okay, these are informational items, so no public comment. Sounds good. Okay, thank you. Moving on, 21B, Sage-Grouse update. Director Ken Mayer, in accordance with the Commission's request, Director Mayer will provide an update on the status of Sage-Grouse, which is pending listing under the Endangered Species Act.
Okay, this is your routine update of what's going on. And it seems like I said before, about 25% of my time is tied up with Sage-Grouse. I want to always remind folks that while 2015 is the decision point for the greater Sage-Grouse listing from the Fish and Wildlife Service, it's actually 2014, because they make a 12-month finding come September 30th, 2014. If they find warranted, then they have that's their finding. Then there's 1 year where they take input from the general public. And I can tell you from experience that it would take a huge epiphany, if you will, to change their mind if they said it's warranted at that point. Something would have to happen that would be so dramatic that they would say, oh yeah, you know, based on all the input and new information, that the species really is warranted for listing. So what that does effectively is make us work really hard to get all the pieces in place to address the issues that they have identified for Sage-Grouse. The 5 listing factors, they looked at a bunch of variables. I think we talked about that in one of the I think it was our Fallon meeting. The 19 or 20 different variables that affect Sage-Grouse. When they looked at the listing factors, 2 things stood out. One was habitat loss and fragmentation. And we're making great progress there across the West, but they recognize that it may take 30 or 50 years really to bring that habitat back to fully functional for Sage-Grouse. But we get credit for doing the work we're doing. The second part of it is a regulatory framework sufficient enough to ensure the sustainability and the long-term viability of the species through time. And they felt that there was not a significant regulatory framework in place to ensure that. Because of the BLM has over about 60% of the bird's habitat, everything's really focused on the BLM. BLM has just completed a timeline whereby they're and an instructional memorandum that's going to give instruction to the Western states state directors, BLM, and their districts, how they're going to function from this point forward, while they're developing an EIS, a series of EISs that will modify the resource management plans, because that's where the rubber meets the road. You got to have it in a resource management plan that directs how management's going to be done on the ground, and that's the way they prevailed in court, is with an RMP modification. So they have 71 RMPs. I think 23 or 24 or 20, somewhere around 25 are in the process of being updated. So they're going to update those with the IM and the conservation measures that have been developed from a national technical team. And they're going to start with the actual writing of an EIS for East and West, and there may be a couple of others that will address specific nuances of specific locations that are different than everywhere else. So their approach seems reasonable. The good news here is the paradigm shift is that the Fish and Wildlife Service is sitting right at the table with us, telling us, yes, this works, no, that doesn't work, which is huge, because the way it used to be done would be that the agencies would go back in a vacuum, really, with a little input from the Fish and Wildlife Service, and do all this wonderful stuff. And then when the data call came, turned in the information, and the services say, well, you brought me the wrong rock. And at that point, listed, done. So that's not the case. We've got the service arm in arm with us every step of the way. The IM has taken 3 or 4 months. I serve in the national policy team, so I'm in those weekly calls. The state game agency directors have had input on, and their staff input on the IM, and so we're about that close to having that thing come out, probably before Christmas. That's the goal. The time frame for the bi-state is 2012, so we got 8 months. And so there's just a ton of stuff going on with the bi-state. On Thursday, the technical team we put together from BLM, Forest Service, California and Nevada, ourselves, and NRCS, California and Nevada, their technical experts are working together, developing an action plan for what is going to be implemented starting muy rapido. And while we can't modify the resource management plans in that amount of time, we're hoping that the action plan is going to be directing what work's going to be done on the ground, and the instructional memorandum from the various federal agencies, Forest Service being the big player here, they got 45% of the habitat, will actually be doing work on the ground directed by policy and directives. And we're hoping with the long-term goal to actually modify the resource management plans, that will be adequate for the service when they make their finding in 2012, that they could find a not warranted finding. The question in my mind, and I've had a number of conversations with the people in D.C., and I've urged them not to let the lawyers make the decision here, because the solicitors always want to find safe ground. And the safe ground is having an RMP. If you don't have an RMP modification, they don't think they can win in court, therefore list it. And I'm saying that if you do that, service, with all this work being done, you'll send the wrong message to the people who are trying to conserve the species, because we'll walk away from it, because it'll now become a ward of the feds, not the states. And I know the private landowners will. It'll be a mess. So again, the service is working arm in arm with us on that, and I'm hopeful we'll have done a tremendous amount of work and be able to document it and be ready for the data call in 2012. The conservation measures are the things that we're going to ask that will be considered in the EISs. Those were developed by the National Technical Team, and the National Technical Team is made up of all the WAFWA state Sage-Grouse experts, as well as key federal experts, and from academia. The those are pretty well done, and I asked for an outside technical review to find out whether, I mean, you know, when you're living in your own house, you think your house looks great till somebody comes over and says, what the hell, why'd you do that? So we hired, I think, 5 different grouse experts that have not been really involved in the sage-grouse to take a look at the IM, the conservation measures, and the science behind it. Dr. Tom Remington, the director of Colorado, got his PhD working on blue grouse. Very, very knowledgeable guy. He's no longer the director. He's been home, retired, and I called him. I said, "Would you lead that effort?" And he jumped at the opportunity, and he made the observation that in our zeal to get all this paperwork together, we didn't have a real strong link between the science and the conservation measures. So starting next Tuesday in Arizona, he's going to have the NTT together to make that linkage so that we don't have we're not vulnerable from that. So things are progressing. Conference calls every week, meetings seems like every week on both the bi-state and the greater. A couple things that I was asked by the governor a couple weeks ago to represent him in Wyoming. The Wyoming governor is asked for a summit of the western states governors to talk about sage-grouse and where we're going. The Secretary of Interior is going to be there. I don't know how many governors are actually going to show up. I don't know how many directors like myself have been given the proxy to speak for the governor. It'll be very, very interested to find out how this meeting goes, because there's the Wyoming model, and we've all kind of taken the Wyoming model, which is basically let's focus on the core areas for sage-grouse, because 25% of the ground basically protects 75% of the birds, and we have really much more stringent requirements in the core areas than we do in the non-core, because we still need to provide areas for green energy development and those kinds of things. So it'll be interesting to see how that whole thing goes, whether they're going to be lobbying for their perspective to be ubiquitous across the West or not. But I'm doing that next week. And then on January 18th, we're going to hold a stakeholder meeting. The governor's office is going to lead this, and both Senator Reed and Senator Heller's office will be involved, and we're inviting the general public and the stakeholders to come to Carson, and we're going to give an overview of the biology of the sage-grouse. The BLM, the Forest Service, and NRCS are going to talk about what efforts they're doing, and especially this EIS process, and where everybody can have input to the process over the next 2 or 3 years. So that will really be the kickoff for bringing stakeholder information. So lots of stuff is going on, and I will continue to keep you up to speed as our meetings progress. So.
Okay. Any questions from any of the commissioners with regard to this item? Commissioner Strom?
Mr. Mayor, I don't know if you can clear this up for me or not, or is there a baseline that is used to establish when a bird or animal or a lizard or a tortoise or something of the sort becomes considered to be threatened or endangered or anything of that nature? The reason I ask that is because off and on the last few months I've received histories of early Nevada from early 1800s up through the mid 1850s, and the early explorers talk about their diet, or perhaps their lack of diet, and the fact that they, virtually practically starved coming across a Great Basin and all the way from, like Walker Lake forward and up everything. But what they did eat, what they couldn't eat, they ate their horses, ate the burros, ate the dogs, and there's very, very little reference to sage-grouse in there. You don't really get a reference to sage-grouse and things of that nature until the ranchers and farmers came in and started developing the area. Then you start getting references to the number of birds that everyone is seeing and eating. So now we're going back and they're saying now we're suffering a loss of sage-grouse. We're talking about putting them on the endangered species list. And once you do that, nothing except for maybe the golden eagle ever comes off the list. And I just wonder if there's a baseline they use to say, hey, now we're going to say that, we're in trouble.
Yeah. Well, we've read Assemblyman Hanson's things he sent around, and whether or not that's a scholarly work or not, I don't want to debate that, but that really doesn't enter into the what the population was in 1890 or 1860 has no impact on the Endangered Species Act today. That is all predicated on the probability of persistence of that species from this point forward. And so that's what they looked at. Not that it was a very low population and we can manage it back to that low number, whatever that might be, would be a guesstimate at best. So what the service does, and required by law, is that they take a look at the species, they look at the threats, and they say, what's the probability of the species persisting through time into the future? And in their estimation and their population modeling, that they were not convinced that given the threats and given the regulatory surety that the habitats would not further degrade or be lost, that they could not guarantee, or they felt that the persistence probably was low, therefore it was warranted to be listed as a threatened species. So that's how the system works.
Is that like they go up and check the lakes over a period of time, like say a couple of years or 4 or 5 years, and have more birds, less birds, and
yeah, the LEC data is really more of a trend because you can't get the population from LEC because you only look at males primarily, right? And yes, LEC, some places like the bi-state, we're actually on an increasing population trend right now. If you would use LECs as an indicator of overall population trend, what they looked at was the threats of wildfire, and then bi-state they think that potentially disease from West Nile virus, because sage-grouse are very, very vulnerable to that, and the fact that there's no real regulatory framework to keep to protect the sage-grouse habitat from development from minerals or wind energy and those kinds of things. So based on those things, irrespective of the population trend, they determined it was warranted for listing.
Thank you.
Okay, any other, Mr. Drew?
Thanks. Ken, just a quick question. I know we're thinking the IM might be out before this meeting, and obviously that hasn't happened, which seemed like an ambitious time frame. But I've had several people asking me, and of course I haven't seen it, but what the IM might mean in terms of two separate things, really. One, existing multiple uses on public land, especially the BLM land, and two, future development on those lands. You've probably seen some of the working stuff. Can you comment on those two items and potential impact?
The reason it's taken so long is because the debate over what do you do with current right-of-ways, or what do you do with projects that are in the mill right now in the middle of their EIS process? Do you pull the plug on them? And what the service said was that if it's going to have a significant adverse effect on the bird, and even though it's in the EIS process, that BLM, you need to tell them that they can't do it. Okay? So, but where do you snap that line? I mean, are you within a week of... we're trying to find some wording here to allow for development, and maybe to let some of those projects go on. But I'll give you a perfect example. China Mountain. China Mountain couldn't be planned in a worse place for sage-grouse. It's got some of the best sage-grouse habitat in Nevada, and more so in Idaho. They're down the road a ways. They got millions of dollars invested in this, and it's right in the middle core area. So they're even with this IM, struggling with an analysis of can the birds survive and persist if that project's in place. If the wording in the IM would allow for, let's say the China Mountain thing wasn't in core habitat, and there was a way to mitigate, or you could absorb that loss in the service's mind and still persist as a population, then that would be, there's some wording in the IM to allow that to go on. So it's not doom and gloom. It's really the wording right now basically says if you've got it in the worst place in the world, you got a problem, basically. And they need to cease and desist until, or maybe it'll take a little longer to get through the EIS process because there may be some modification in the footprint of the project in order for the project to have non-significant effect on the bird. That's the first one, and then you can imagine what the emails have been looking like. People are starting to figure this out. I mean, bottom line is, what we have been doing for decades, we're not going to be able to do for decades, or the bird's going to get listed. And so on one hand, you've got a situation where how in your right mind could you authorize a project that you knew the service is going to say that's a significant adverse effect on the population and may have a population effect that would affect everybody in the room for one project. So that's the struggle, and that's where the lawsuits are going to be coming from, because it's not when we're going to be sued, it's going to be, and not if, but when. So you had two parts of your question, and I think that's the first part of it. But
yeah, so it sounds like most of the changes will impact development and projects going forward, not so much more of your traditional land uses. I'm thinking
right.
Things like grazing, recreation, access, things of that nature.
If grazing's really not been discussed and all the stuff, except if you had an area, and I think the livestock operators would be a huge proponent of this. If we had critical sage-grouse habitat in core area that was overgrazed by horses or livestock or whatever, that we would take appropriate action. Or the BLM would take appropriate action. But as a general policy, no. There may be in this EIS process, a review of grazing in core areas and see whether there are significant adverse impacts going on and how to mitigate that through different maybe management regimes. That might be discussed, but it's not been really identified. Most of this is really driven after oil and gas and green energy development. And what I'm seeing is people in the industry are starting to wake up. Oh boy, why should I put $1 million in this location just because it's got a little better production from energy? I could move it over here and have no problems and get almost as much energy. The cost factor is going to be huge over in the core area where it's not going to be in the non-core area.
I don't even know if I should ask this, but I'm going to anyway. Do you, based on our discussion yesterday about the Southern Nevada Water Authority pipeline project and what you're telling us today, is there the potential that that project could be impacted by the IM?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, if they were actually putting structures on the ground, and the question about money, if the state engineer finds in favor of Southern Nevada Water Authority, and if they started to actually build infrastructure, and it'd be like the Ruby Pipeline, they start building a pipeline and they're going to have to destroy sage-grouse habitat, even if it's not listed. I mean, the money was then provided for mitigation, if you will, on-site and off-site. So there's a lot of work to be done there. If it's listed, that'll be a big lift if they're building pipeline to water transfer south through sage-grouse habitat. And especially these meadows that are so critical to the females and their young in the first 6 weeks of their life.
Okay, any further questions on sage-grouse? Okay, moving on to 21C, donations report. Deputy Director Patrick Cates, Commission will review a report of donations to the Department of Wildlife and the Nevada Board of Wildlife Commissioners for the first quarter of fiscal year 2012.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You should have a one-page report in your package. Donations for the first quarter of fiscal year 12 to the Commission. We didn't post any donations. It's not really the right time of year for it, for heritage tags and that sort of thing. Donations, agency donations to NDOW. We did receive a non-cash donation from the Nevada Chucker Foundation for survey flights. totaling $12,951. Those were paid directly from Nevada Chucker to El Arrow. We also received $222 in miscellaneous donations for Operation Game Thief. And then in the Wildlife Trust account, our new department gift fund, we received $36,500 donation from the Carson Valley Chucker Club. That was split pretty evenly between the game and habitat divisions for a variety of upland game projects, some of them on the WMA, some PJ removal. And those are all the gifts, grants, and donations from private sources that we received during the quarter. And yesterday, I can't remember if it was Commissioner Robb, I think, that mentioned the $150,000 donation from NBU. We did receive that. That'll be in the second quarter report. And we received other similar donations as well for trap and transplant. So these donations will show quite a bit more activity in the next quarter. Also, if I could just mention briefly, this is the first report for the new Wildlife Trust Fund. We will be reporting to the legislature after next quarter. We're to make biennial reports to the legislature, and we'll report to the commission at the same time. And we will also be doing, if not biannually, certainly at the end of the fiscal year, a more detailed report of not only of the donation itself, but specifically what it was spent on. We're going to report that to the legislature, to the commission, as well as to the donors. And be happy to answer any questions.
Hey, any questions for Deputy Director Cates on the donation report? Okay, seeing none, I will move on to 21D, litigation report. Deputy Attorney General Nguyen, give us an update.
Okay, thank you. All of our cases are plugging along. I'll just go through them very briefly. On the Walker River, we are still in confidential settlement discussions. Wayne Page, briefing is still in progress. NDOW is not expecting to file any further briefs in that case. In Carson Lake and Pasture, we are in mandatory mediation, and our brief is currently due on January 20th. That's probably going to be pushed back a little. Typically, we have another call on the mediation, and when we do, that usually gets scheduled out a little bit more. Russell Elms, that case is basically over. I just need to do some procedural filings to get that completely closed. On Brian Christie, we filed a motion for judgment on the pleadings, and that was submitted for a decision just last week. And on Cloud Foundation, that's a Wild Horses case, we received a scheduling order, and I believe NDOW's brief is due sometime in March. And number 7, Hernan versus NDOW, we are in briefing on this case as well. And that's all. Any questions?
Okay, you bet. Commissioner Rain.
Thank you. This question on the number 5, the Brian Christie case. You said the judgment pleadings was filed. What are the possible outcomes of that? I mean, what's
The motion for judgment on the pleadings was basically a motion to dismiss.
Okay.
Basically based on qualified immunity. So if it gets granted, we'd be out of the case.
Okay, and if it's not granted, then
We go to trial.
We go to trial.
We try some other method. But
Thank you.
that's basically a motion to dismiss based
Gotcha.
on the case law.
okay.
Mine was
Okay, Commissioner McNich.
Mine was less of a comment as it was a question. At some point in the next few meetings, whenever it fits best, it might be beneficial to bring number 3 as a regular agenda item. It's been a long time since I've heard much about it, and I think it would be beneficial for everybody to hear the story on where we started and where we're at now, to kind of get a feel for it, because that's a pretty big deal. And is that something that we can do?
I definitely, and I think that would be good to bring a refresher. And I think there are some commissioners who may not have been involved. I know you were on the commission way back when we had the hearing before the state engineer, and it kind of languished in the district court for a few years. So it's now, and then we received a decision which was not favorable, and then we appealed that. But I think that's a great idea to bring it back as an agenda item and provide kind of the facts and the details so that it's not just the Carson Lake and Pasture, but we know more of its purpose and why we are in litigation.
There are former commissioners that are still very active in that case, and you know, we see it as a paragraph here, and we don't really understand how complicated and complex and how many resources have gone into that particular one is phenomenal, and it would be worth hearing the stories.
I was naive to think that we would transfer that over while I was
You could sign
director.
on the bottom line and be done.
Yeah, and there are some other ancillary issues such as the transfer of the wetlands, which I don't think is heard.
No, and I can give you a little quick briefing on that. When Congress got in the middle of this consolidation of the budget, what happened was I won't say which party, looked at all the dollars that had been allocated, even through other congressional actions and budgets. If it had not been encumbered, it got swept. So Senator Reid, in order to save his $120 million, had to and the $120 million was for Walker Lake and Carson Lake and Pasture and Pyramid Lake and all the things that he had worked out, these deals with the various groups with water and wetlands and whatnot that were distinct and separate. The budgeteers thought, no, they're all the same, and if you haven't encumbered it, we're sweeping it. He then moved all that money into Walker Lake. So now he's trying to break it back out, unencumber that, and he's having because of the pork barrel, the Tea Partiers, and you can't. And then Obama came out with a directive that these entitlements are no more. So he's trying to make the case that Carson Lake and Pastures is not like that. It's separate. It's got it's a different thing. The other thing he's trying is the Bureau of Reclamation. There's $3 million there. The Bureau of Reclamation has spent $500,000 for the EIS, the Archaeological Survey. Well, they waited, and they've been waiting and waiting and waiting for years. And so the point is that because they have dragged their feet, that they really need to find money within their own budget, because $2.5 million is rounding error to a BOR, quite frankly. And so he's got 4 or 5 avenues, I've been told by his state office reps, to try to deal with that. So at this point, who knows where Carson Lake and Pasture, there is no money for Carson Lake and Pasture transfer at this point. So all we got to do is keep pushing the noodle. Are you
Okay, so
Not yet. I'm sure I will be.
okay, so we'll be looking at maybe putting that on agenda. Probably not February, but maybe March or
March or April.
March or April. Okay. Okay, moving on. 21E, Department Activities, Leadership Team Notes. Secretary Ken Mayer.
Well, so Suzanne, where are we at as far as backlog?
Well, we sent out November, I believe October, November, and we have one that's ready to go.
Okay, so we're a little behind. We're getting better. We're trying to catch up. We're trying to break it down instead of having so much narrative, more bulleted, and thinking that if you want more information, we can provide it. But we'll give the other thing we're going to send out to you all is the department's report to WAFWA for January, and it goes through each division and has a more detailed description of the things that have been going on. So that'll be in addition to what we normally do. We're meeting on, instead of on Mondays at 1:30, we're meeting on Tuesdays. It just seemed like there was too many things going on Monday to kind of get ready to have our leadership team meetings. So we're doing it on Tuesdays. And you're more than welcome to come if you like.
Video conference, McBeath.
Okay, let's move on. Agenda item 22, Nevada Board of Wildlife Commissioners Committee assignments. Chairman McBeath for possible action. Chairman will designate and adjust adjust committee assignments, including creation of new committees, the consolidation of existing committees, and the elimination of existing committees as necessary. The commission will take the action to approve the revised committees and committee assignments as proposed by the chairman. Because of my schedule, my hunting schedule, I have not been very good at putting together the committee assignments, and so I had gone down the road quite a ways of doing this, and then we had some issues that were raised with regard to our ability to have non-commission members of committees or non-CAB chairman members of the committees, and so I was going to have to basically go back through and look at all of the committee assignments again and try to get that worked out or come up with some resolution of how to do the committee assignments. Unfortunately, my time schedule has just not allowed me to do anything on this, and I knew that there was nothing pressing, at least for this meeting. So what I would like to do is go ahead and set up some new committees and talk about that today and get those approved, and to talk about the elimination and maybe consolidation of certain committees, and have all the committees themselves set, and then I will go ahead and then get authorization from the commission to go ahead and make the committee assignments within the next week or two. So that's really the game plan I have at this point. So with that, I may need some assistance here, remembering back exactly what committees we talked about creating. But the first committee that comes to mind was creating a public lands committee to deal with all public land issues. And in conjunction with creating that committee would be to do away with the feral horse committee, and not so much to do away with it, but to bring the issues of the feral horse committee into the public lands committee. And so that would be the first committee that I would like to create, and the idea there was to have the chairman of that committee be Commissioner Drew, because of his background in public lands. So that was the first one. The second new committee was going to be a tag allocation committee. We got a lot of people that are interested in, we've had that committee in the past, and we feel there's enough issues, new issues with regard to tag that need to be vetted and decided, and so we were going to go ahead and create a tag allocation committee, and I was going to have Vice Chairman Robb be the chairman of that committee. And then because of the issues that we have with the bear hunt, I had discussions with Commissioner McNinch and others about creating a bear committee to deal with some of the items that we had identified in our past meetings with regard to the bear hunt. There came out of those meetings some very good ideas for some changes, to the regulation. In addition, we can look at, by the time the season's over for this year, we'll be able to potentially take a review of everything that's gone on with the bear hunt and get a report to the commission. So that was going to be a new committee. And so off the top of my head, I think that was it. Is there any other committees that we talked about?
Did you have a chair for the bear?
I was going to ask if
Let's volunteer.
Commissioner McNish want to do that one?
I'll take it on.
Okay. Bear and trapping, yeah. What a man.
Bear trapping committee.
But
It's all be on the board for 3 years. They wouldn't.
and for the very same reasons that I pointed him to the trapping committee would be the exact same reasons I would point him to the chair of the bear committee, because it's really the issues are very core to his constituency, and so having Commissioner McNinch chair that committee is makes sense to me, and I think it'll be in good hands. So other than that, do we see? Do we have our list?
I did put a copy of your old list in what's on your place.
Oh, okay. Where is it?
While you're looking for your papers, do we have anything pressing on timelines for the Heritage Committee that we need to think about the Heritage Committee?
We need a Heritage Committee because
Here's
come
the old list, and this is what I have.
January, we'll be, end of January, 1st of February, we'll be sending.
Well, we want to bring back the regulations to the February meeting, and I'd assume you'd want the Heritage Committee to look at those before that. It could
Okay.
also be done by Policy Committee, too, whichever.
Just looking at this, the other committee that would be pulled into the Public Lands Committee would be the Mule Deer Restoration Committee. That committee would basically go away, and its charge and whatever status would be pulled into the Public Lands Committee. And then we definitely are going to have a Wildlife Heritage Committee. And so if we do need to, if I need to get those appointments first, then we can certainly get that done immediately to meet any timeline issues that we have. So with that, why don't I ask for comments from the commission? Any comments on the creation or I don't want to use the word elimination of committees. It's really pulling, it's really consolidation of committees, some of the prior committees into the single Public Lands Committee. Any comments with respect to that? Okay, seeing none. Then this is an action item, so why don't I go ahead and take it out to the public? Do I have any comments from the public with regard to the creation of these new committees and the consolidation of some of the prior committees? It was,
Mr. Dixon will have questions.
okay, come on up.
For the record, Paul Dixon. Question I had is your Public Lands Committee, is that going to also focus on some of the things that we discussed here, which had to do with, we had wolves, we have solar, we have wind, oil, gas, mining. Is that committee going to take on all of those issues and then how we deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, that is the issue. I'm not so sure that wolves fit into that, but definitely solar, wind, any of the issues that have to do with public land resources, wild horses,
Okay.
so any of that. So yeah, it's a pretty big.
It's a big charter.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Thanks.
Access?
yeah, the road transportation, all that stuff. Yeah.
Access.
I consider it to be probably a committee we're going to have for a very long time, and it'll just be an ongoing process. So, okay, so I guess I can make my own motion and kind of
bring it back from.
Oh, yeah. So any other public comment with regard to the committees? Okay, seeing none, I'll go ahead and bring it back to the commission. Any other comments from the commission? Okay, then I guess what I'd like to do is make a motion to, one, create a Public Lands Committee, and in the process of creating the Public Lands Committee, consolidate the Mule Deer Restoration Committee and the Feral Horse Committee into the Public Lands Committee. In other words, all issues and the status of anything that's pending in those committees basically are now going to be rolled up into the Public Lands Committee. Two, create a tag allocation committee. And let me go back to number one with regard to Public Lands Committee and with regard to Public Lands Committee. Well, no, I tell you what. What I'm going to ask is that the commission allow me to appoint all of the members of the committee, including the chair. But I'll just mention that as to the Public Lands Committee, we'll appoint Commissioner Drew as the chairman. Okay, number two, creation of tag allocation committee, and appoint Vice Chairman Robb as the chair of that committee. Three, create a bear committee and appoint Commissioner McNinch as the chair to that committee. And then I believe the only other thing is to maybe indicate appointment of a chairman for the Wildlife Heritage Committee, and I've asked Commissioner Wallace if he would be willing to do that, and he's indicated he would. And so we can get going on that right away. And so the last part of the motion would be to allow me as the chairman to appoint all members of these committees and get that done within the next couple weeks. So that's my motion.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion, a second. Any other discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing
Throw
that.
out one thing.
Okay, go ahead, Commissioner.
Just one thing on the Public Lands Committee. Now that's such a broad charter. That's a task in 3/4. I mean, either one of the other two committees there, they were a full-time deal. You add in the rest of the public lands things, that's 6 committees in one. That's having a committee meeting at least a couple times a month if you're trying to even come close. Just throwing that out.
You gonna handle it?
It's doable.
Okay. Okay, so I have a motion and a second. Any other comment? Any other questions? I'll go ahead and call for a vote. All in favor of the motion, state aye. Aye. All opposed?
Hey.
Commissioner Vogler?
Hey.
Okay, so the motion passes 7-2 with Commissioners Rain and Vogler voting no. Okay, super. Then let's move on to agenda item number 23, Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, WAFWA, midwinter and annual